If you believe, and I want to say this so clearly, if you believe you have depression, and even if you're just not sure, seek help from a GP. Go and find out. Unlike medical illnesses and diseases, or some medical illnesses and diseases, depression is treatable. It's very treatable. And what we find with depression is it's also no respecter of persons. What am I doing here? Turning it on. And I want you, if you can imagine with me, like the little cogs in this, life is just a little bit like the cogs turning, and each of us, we move, we change with one another and just doing life on our own at times. And as the different events come and go, we just adapt and we change. Sometimes we even recognise that the habits we use to cope are perhaps not the most helpful. However, we will read that self-help book later. We call the ability to adjust and this ability to, go with the flow, basically. It's called homeostasis. And it's just the ability to maintain equilibrium, just to make life keep going. We have emotional stability. What happens, though, when this thief comes into our lives? It's like the cogs fall apart. You can imagine me sitting there, going into this panic attack about dinner, and the wheels well and truly fell off my life. I genuinely thank God for a strong, supportive family, for a doctor who knew me and my history, and for a husband who loved me through it. And depression affects many people in many and varied ways. Two may be diagnosed with the same form of depression, and yet we'll all have different ways of experiencing this. And I love a quote by Theodore Roosevelt where it says, the comparison is the thief of joy. And yet how many of us spend our life comparing, well, I've got the same thing as you, and look at you, you're doing so well. What's the matter with me? Whereas we're totally different people, totally different makeup, different family histories, different personalities. So if we can grab and grasp that the illness is so much more than a diagnosis, there are all those contributing factors involved, which is why I believe we treat it with medication when necessary, and we have therapy, because therapy helps us manage, helps us redefine and redevelop better and different coping strategies. It's best, some of the characteristics of depression, maybe listen and see if there's some alarm bells ringing here for you. Certainly this isn't a limited list, but there's this daily feeling of sadness, and the diagnosis is it would be there for more than 2 weeks. We just can't be bothered eating. I know I went down to just over 41 kilograms. We can't sleep. There's this incredible sense of hopelessness and an emptiness about us. What's the point? Why look at tomorrow? I'm flat out getting through today. I couldn't make dinner. Like, quite literally, what is the point? It's like our whole world is caving in, and it's like my very core of my being is aching. There's just no vitality. We could live forever without ever having sex again. There's no joy. Again, what's the point? The idea of making a decision, even be it something like having dinner, it just fills us with this anxiety and this incredible dread. We feel constantly anxious and literally worry ourselves sick. We feel guilty. Look at my kids. How pathetic a mother am I? Look at my husband. He could do so much better. I can't even be a proper wife to him. The guilt that we carry is ridiculous. There's no colour. I remember thinking like I was just in a well and it was just black. I had no feeling. There was just nothing. And there's this incredible sense of worthlessness. I want to sleep all day. I can't, but I want to. I can't get out of bed. can't concentrate on anything. Read a book, oh my goodness. And well-meaning people in the church told me to read my Bible more. Too many words. Just people in blackness can't do that. And everything can irritate or agitate you. Now, I'm not saying that we feel all of these characteristics, but we may feel some of them. We may experience some of them. Somebody in your life, one of your mates, may be experiencing. You may have noticed that he's got much more of these happening in his life or her life. Those of us observing someone experiencing depression can recognise they're just not like their normal self, because these characteristics and our influences, they literally, it's like the wheels have fallen off. They affect our body, they affect our soul, and they affect our spirit. There's I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Robbie Sonderegger. He's a clinical psychologist here on the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, and he's created this acronym, SPIRAL, and he says it's just a really easy to remember way of not analysing, because we're not specialists, but just checking. So the acronym SPIRAL, the S is for sad. It's like unremitting. It's not just, oh, I'm sad today. It doesn't leave us. It's like a companion. It's like, again, let's use the thief. It's like this thief has moved in and won't leave me alone. The P is for our pleasures. Our sensory experiences disappear. We lose the capacity to just enjoy the littlest thing. Once we used to have little hobbies. Who could be bothered? Once we used to enjoy sitting and watching a movie with friends. Friends. Can't be bothered. The insomnia. You'll wake up the early hours of the morning more typically than just insomnia in general. And you can't go to sleep again. And you know that this is going to make you even cope even less. And then you get anxious, and then the anxiety pushes you further and further, and then you can become quite angry, quite agitated, quite anxious. Because you know what lack of sleep does to you. And why can't I sleep? It's just, again, if we go back to the characteristics, that hopelessness, the guilt, the worthlessness that invades our minds in the early hours of the morning. These thieves that come in and rob us. Our relationships suffer. The only thing we remember is negative. Everything. You'll leave here today. Somebody may have told you how great your hair is, how terrific, I don't know, they'll share a funny story with you, but you'll remember one thing or two things that are negative. We actually lose the ability to remember happiness, and our relationships suffer because, and you know this, you're like a wet rag. We talk about the libido listening, where you mightn't even want to have sex anymore. So what sort of pressure does that put on a relationship? You used to be somebody that would go out with your mates all the time. Oh, you're just a stick in the mud. What's the matter with you? So you can see how the impact on the relationships. And my mistake is that actually should read remember. It does impact our relationships, but it needs to read, Robbie Sonderegger has it, that it's remember, and that's that negative remembering. And it's the loneliness, and this is more around the relationships. The loneliness and the isolation. We feel lonely, we feel isolated because we have depression. So the very thing that we would have that combats that is to build relationships, but we can't be bothered. So loneliness and isolation, they are contributing factors as well as symptoms. Studies have shown that amongst people in community, loneliness is one of the greatest emotions experienced. I don't know how to reach into somebody's life and build relationship if they're not going to sort of come out the door to invite us in. But if we could be aware, if we live in community, be aware that loneliness has been rated as one of the highest emotions experienced by people. And again, let's become a little bit more confident, a little bit more expert at reaching out and connecting. So they're just good indicators that somebody, ourselves, or somebody we're doing life with, may be experiencing depression. What happens when people are experiencing depression? This is what's happening, either you've experienced this or for one of your friends, is we try to justify or explain, like, why? Why am I so weak? Why is this happening to me? And I know an example would be, I haven't this year, but certainly last year I was still meeting up with people affected by the 2011 floods. And one of the experiences that you hear is, so you've got a couple of people, they've experienced the same traumatic event. They've each lost their house, their stock. These particular ones I'm thinking of didn't lose loved ones, which adds to that, because they think, I didn't lose anybody. But I don't understand this. My neighbour isn't experiencing this. What's wrong with me? And that's that comparison. It's that thief that robs us of our joy. And what happens is we then start to feel more guilty. And shame can come in. And guilty speaks to me and says, I've done something. So guilty would tell me, oh, my depression is bad, it's bad for that, and I'll feel guilty. Shame, on the other hand, it's more insidious, because shame says, I am bad. It's not that I've done something bad or something bad's happening. We take it on, it's like a part of our identity then. And what these people will say, it's not like I actually lost someone, I've still got my life. I'm just pathetic. I wonder if you just take a moment and think, what would you say to that person? A lot of the times, these are what we call awkward moments, and I'll address that a little bit later. But certainly that what goes through my head is, why do we compare when it's to our own detriment? Why do we struggle to accept that it's okay not to feel okay? And again, if I use myself as the example, I worked with women. I hadn't done my counselling course at that stage, but I certainly worked with women who had suffered incredible abuse. And many of them were on antidepressants and self-harming and that. And I was like just such an advocate that they take their medications, because I saw the benefit in this. So it was okay for them to not be okay until it was me. How pathetic am I that I need antidepressants? So when we talk about, are you okay? And I love that slogan, and I believe we need to ask our friends, our mates this. I think we need to ask ourselves, how am I if I'm not okay? Am I okay not being okay? And let's try and work on that. Let's try and do what it takes to make it literally okay to not be okay. And that we have the courage to go and do something about that. Because I reckon that to a person here, that if you saw your mate being robbed, you'd actually do something about that. You'd intervene. And yet we have this thief called depression who breaks into our mate's life, who breaks into our own lives. So do what it takes. Let's learn to do what it takes. Let's break the silence on this thief called depression.